Hi everybody, I'm Susan Mulvihill. Welcome back to my vegetable garden. You know, I think I have over 500 gardening videos on my YouTube channel. And yet out of all of the topics I've covered, I don't think I've ever done one about composting. So today is the day for that. You know, compost is an essential ingredient for a healthy, productive vegetable garden. And yet it's so easy to overthink it and make it way more complicated than it needs to be. So today I promise to tell you exactly what you need to know, and I'm going to keep it simple. So what is compost anyway? Well, by definition, it is organic material that has decayed and can be used as a soil amendment. What I like to do every spring, very early, is to apply 1 to 2 inches to the surface of our raised beds, and again in the fall, provided I have enough. This year I'm planning to make more compost. But the thing that's really nice is you don't have to disturb the soil at all to mix the compost in, because the nutrients are going to filter down into it all by themselves. To be successful at making your own compost, you need 4 elements: carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, and water. And just because I know you're going to ask, this is a honeysuckle vine and this is American cranberry bush. Isn't that a beauty? Now chances are you've heard about the carbon to nitrogen ratio, and that is enough to put anybody off from even trying to make their own compost. I promised that I was going to keep this simple. So you want twice as many brown materials, I'll explain what those are in a moment, as green materials. So the brown represents carbon and the green represents nitrogen. Now let's look at examples of what those 2 elements are. Here's an example of brown materials, which again represent carbon. So dried leaves is a great example, and we all have an abundance of them, right? I would avoid adding walnut leaves if you can, just because of the natural chemical they contain. You can use animal bedding like straw or sawdust, torn up cardboard, preferably corrugated cardboard, dead plant material, branches that are small in diameter, eggshells, hair, I know that might sound a little bit gross, but it's an option, shredded newspaper, shredded paper, like what you put through a shredder, straw or hay. Green materials represent nitrogen, so examples of them would be something like grass clippings, provided you do not use herbicides like weed and feed on your lawn. This is very important. Coffee grounds, kitchen scraps, green plant material, tea bags, or droppings from animals like chickens or rabbits. Now let's talk about the things you should not add to your compost pile, and this is a very important list. First of all, do not add meat, bones, fish, cooking oils, or dairy products, and that's because they will attract all kinds of critters, and you really don't want to be attracting them to your garden. You don't want to use the manures from carnivorous animals, and that's because the manure will contain pathogens. You don't want to go anywhere near those. You also don't want to add the manure from horses and in some cases cattle. The reason for this is if they have been fed hay that was treated with a persistent herbicide, it can take several years for it to dissipate. So if you add it into your compost pile and then you add the compost to your garden, you are going to have a whole lot of heartbreak because it takes forever to go away. You do not want to add in diseased plant material. If you had some type of a plant disease in your vegetable garden or even in your ornamental garden, do not put it in your compost pile, because it can proliferate that problem throughout your garden. You don't want that. So when you have diseased plants, you want to put them in your trash and send them down the road. And last but not least, you don't want to add in weeds that are hard to control, and especially ones that have flower heads where the seeds in them are developing, because that can be a nightmare. Now, as you can see, we have a new addition in our garden. Bill and I recently put together a 3-bin composting system using 2 free pallets and some inexpensive fence boards so it would look nice from the outside. My plan is to start composting in bin number 1. When I've finished adding materials to it in a few weeks or sooner, I'll move the materials to bin number 2 and start a new pile in bin number 1, and so on. We also have this compost tumbler, which I bought many years ago. It's a closed system, meaning it is confined within this barrel-like structure. It has a hand crank for turning the pile. This system has worked well for me, but I want to be able to make more compost. However, if you have wild animals such as rats, raccoons, groundhogs, opossums, or skunks, you'll want to keep them out of your compost pile by going with a closed system. If you do a web search on closed compost systems, you'll see a lot of options. You can also just make your compost pile on the ground. Keep it simple. I want to start building a compost pile in this first bin, but I wanted to tell you about something that is very helpful for us. We generate a lot of kitchen scraps because we love to cook, and of course we grow all kinds of wonderful vegetables. Well, years ago, we bought this compost pail from Gardener's Supply. I just checked, they still sell them, and so it's covered and it has a carbon filter in the lid. We do not have any problems with fruit flies, and we don't smell any odors because of the little carbon filter. This has worked great. So we fill it up over the course of a few days, bring it out to the compost bin, and then refill it as time goes by. This has been really helpful, and I just wanted to make sure you knew about it. They're not expensive at all, but they are ideal. Okay, let's make a pile. So I've got all kinds of kitchen scraps here, some tea bags, coffee filters, and I'm just going to keep adding things to it, and then I will mix it together a bit. So these are actually shredded paper from my office. That will supply carbon. I've got an egg carton that I don't need for anything, and so I'm just going to tear it up into pieces. I don't know if you know this, but the smaller the pieces that you add to your compost pile, the more quickly they will decompose. So a lot of times people will add leaves, but maybe they run over them with their lawnmower, or they're adding cardboard and tearing them into pieces and so on. But I'm trying to have twice as much carbon as nitrogen. I've been doing a lot of garden cleanup lately, so there's plenty of materials. I just mowed the grass yesterday, so I've got plenty of grass clippings. Now those are greens or nitrogen. I do not want to add too many of them. I want more browns or carbon. Fortunately, I also like to use the grass clippings as a mulch around the base of my vegetable plants, so I've got plenty of places to put the extra grass clippings. Okay, I've got a bunch of greens and browns together in here. And remember, there's 2 other elements. One is moisture or water, and the other is oxygen. So right now, because this pile is fairly loose, there's plenty of oxygen in there, and that's to benefit the microorganisms that break down all of these materials. The other thing I want to do is just add a little bit of water. You want to be careful not to go overboard with this because that can also impede the decomposition process if you use too much. So I'm just using a little bit. There we go. The easiest size compost pile to work with is one that is about 3 feet by 3 feet by 3 feet tall. Larger piles can take a longer time to decompose, and also it's more work on your part to turn the materials over. Now there are 2 kinds of composting methods. One is hot composting and the other is cold composting. With hot composting, you're turning the pile over maybe once a week. You're maybe adding water every so often to make sure that the pile is lightly moist. You don't want it sopping wet. And it takes just a few months to turn into that lovely amendment that we want to add to our gardens. With cold composting, you're pretty much leaving the pile alone. You're not doing the turning, or maybe you might do it every so often. And it's very low maintenance. However, you have to be patient because it can take about a year before you get finished compost. So it's all a matter of, do you want something that's low maintenance, low energy, but you have to wait, or something that will decompose more quickly? Now, one thing I wanted to make you aware of is that if your pile starts smelling kind of funky, rather unpleasant, that means your pile has gone anaerobic. Now, that can be caused by two things: either too much moisture, or the pile really needs to be turned. It's just too compacted, and so you've got anaerobic bacteria working rather than the aerobic ones. So all you have to do, first of all, is check the moisture. Is it seeming like it's too wet? Then you want to cut back on the water. Turn the pile, bringing what's on the inside out, flipping it over and so on, and that odor will go away. So it's an easy fix, but those are the two reasons that can happen: too compact, too wet. One of the things I like to do is to insert a soil or composting thermometer into the compost pile. And what will happen is, through the activities of the microorganisms that are decaying the materials, you'll see the temperature go up, and then it'll go down a little bit, then it'll go up again, then it'll go down again, it'll go up higher, and so on. And it's just fascinating watching the readings on the thermometers. So these thermometers are not expensive. I'm lucky because mine came with my compost tumbler. But you can pick them up in garden centers and online, and it's a great way to get a little window into what's going on in your compost pile. Now, I bet your burning questions are, how do I know when my compost is finished, and how long is that going to take? Well, first of all, finished compost is rich and crumbly. It has a nice earthy scent, and you will no longer be able to recognize the different types of materials you added to the pile. As far as the time frame, if you're doing hot composting, where you're turning the pile about every week and you're taking an active role in the process, you should have finished compost within several months. If you're doing the cold composting method, again, it's probably going to take about a year. So it's all a matter of what method works best for you. Okay, that was a lot of information, but I hope it answered your questions. I want to see you all get out there and make your own compost pile and produce that wonderful soil amendment for your gardens. Thanks so much for watching today, everybody. I'll see you next week. Happy gardening.